Okay kids, you need to watch the Skid Master in action, but not like the other type of skids. Did you see that? That was a good one. Hello grade 3-4s, nice to have you back again this week. Now today we're talking about another force. We've been going through them pretty fast. Today we're going to talk about one called friction. Now I have a friend called Riley who's in grade 3. He's not from Whitehorse Primary School, he's just a friend of mine. And a few weeks ago when we did the balloon rockets, he wrote and said to me, "Are you going to talk about friction?" And I didn't even know kids really knew about friction, but Riley does, and probably some others do. Friction is what happens when two things rub against each other. And often when that happens, it means that the thing slows down. So the thing that's moving might slow down because of rubbing against something else. And when Riley was making the balloon rockets, he had a thought that the straw running along the string was rubbing against it and that might be slowing it down. And he was exactly right. And that's going to be what we're talking about today. Now, another boy from Whitehorse did an experiment where he tried a rough string and a smooth string for his balloon rocket. And this also would have made a difference because of the friction. Hi Abby. Hey. Sorry to interrupt your homework again. This is an episode of Is This Funny to a Teenager? I show Abby a cartoon that I found on the internet. If she thinks it's funny, she picks one of these, then you get to see the cartoon. If she picks one of these ones, you'll never know what the joke was that I thought was funny and Abby didn't. This one's really good. I love this one. Oh no. Oh no, I just shrunk it. I just did it wrong. Okay, you ready? Okay. I really hope you laugh at this one. Laugh, 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 laugh. That's a good one, isn't it?
That's great.
Yay!
That's like something I would do.
I win. Okay, we'll show you. If you have two rough things and you try and rub them together, that's much harder than if you have two shiny, smooth things, isn't it? So I'm going to give you some examples of where friction is in everyday life and have a think what it would be like if there was no friction in the world. Would you be able to do all the everyday activities that you like to do? All right, the first example I want to talk about is walking. Now, without friction, walking would be impossible. Because every time your foot hits a surface, it kind of grips because those two surfaces rub on each other and push on each other a little bit, and then your foot doesn't just slip out from under you and you go falling over, but it grips and then you can push yourself forward. Now, if you have floorboards in your house or tiles in one of your kitchens or bathroom or something, and you've ever tried walking around in socks, you know that thing where you go skidding down the corridor? It's really fun. Well, that's what happens when you have two smooth surfaces near each other. They sort of slip over each other and you don't have that grip. So you have less friction in that situation. Now this also applies to bike riding. So when you're riding along the road, you need that wheel to grip and to that friction to work so that the wheel can keep moving forward. If you were riding your bike on ice, then there wouldn't be any gripping between those two surfaces and you just sort of skid along on your bike. And this happens in some countries where they have ice on the road. All right, what about writing on a piece of paper? If you have a pencil, when you write, little bits of the graphite from your pencil kind of come off in layers onto the paper. But if there was no friction between the pencil and the paper, your pencil would just slide off. And this has happened to me when I've tried to write on things that are like shiny paper. Have you ever tried colouring in on shiny paper? And it just doesn't work, does it? Or if you try to write with a pen on a plastic bag and it just sort of slips off, it doesn't really work either. Because you don't have that friction between the two surfaces, they're a bit smoother. All right, what about lighting a match? If you've ever done that, to light a fire, then when you rub that match along the box, you need the heat and you need that friction to get the match to light. If there was no friction there, then you'd never get the heat, you could never light a match. All right, what about when you're trying to turn the page in a book and you do that thing where you kind of get your finger on the edge and you flick it over because it sticks to your finger a little bit. Now, if there was no friction, you wouldn't be able to turn the page and you'd be trying to grip it and there'd be nothing to grab onto. So that wouldn't work either. Having a world without friction would be kind of like just spending your entire life with socks and mittens on and just touching things that were smooth all the time. That's what it would be like. You wouldn't be able to hold things, you wouldn't be able to walk. Friction is really important. Okay, today I want to tell you a story about two birds that are not usually friends. In fact, these species of birds are usually enemies. So, I've drawn some pictures for you today. One of the birds is a red-tailed hawk that looks not very much like that in real life. And the other one looks exactly like this, a bald eagle. Now, bald eagles are much bigger than red-tailed hawks. Bald eagles generally, they live near the ocean, they generally eat fish, seafoody kind of things. Whereas red-tailed hawks, they usually eat rodents, which are mice and rats and those sort of things, little birds and stuff like that. But eagles are known to be a bit opportunistic, which means that if they see something else that looks tasty, they'll just take it and eat it if they can. So here's a picture to help you remember this, okay? Bald eagles eat fish usually. Hawks usually eat mice and rats. Okay, so there was some footage taken a couple of years ago. You can still find it on the internet. I love this. I might have even told some of you about this. There is a nest of a bald eagle at the top of a tree. And in that nest, it has 3 babies, I think, of its own, which are almost as big as it. So they're huge birds, okay? This one and its babies. But then in the nest also is a tiny bird, which is a chick and fluffy. And it was one of these, a red-tailed hawk, in the nest of this one. And this bald eagle was feeding it and bringing it up as if it was its own baby. Like it hadn't actually noticed that it was bringing up 3 enormous birds and then there's one little titchy one in there as well. And it turned, well, actually no one really knows how it got there. Some people suggested that maybe a hawk came and laid an egg in the eagle's nest when the eagle wasn't looking or something. I don't know if that could be true, but most people have suggested that the way that the red-tailed hawk got in there was that maybe the eagle had actually grabbed it from another nest as food for its babies. And then when it had brought it back to its nest, and it was living now with these guys, it started calling for food and opening its mouth and wanting food, and then perhaps, we don't really know, but they think that the bald eagle started feeding it and then treating it like it was its own baby, accidentally forgetting that it was meant to be eating it instead. So anyway, this little red-tailed hawk grows up in a family of bald eagles. Adoption at its very best, right? And what's funny is that as time went on, it's a bit sad because these eagles kind of go off and become solitary, go far away, and the red-tailed hawk would probably stay in the area. But it turned out that the red-tailed hawk was starting to eat fish, and so there was these videos of it eating fish, which is what these guys eat. So even though it's a hawk, it had sort of learnt some behaviours from its adopted family, which is really interesting. Often animals, if they grow up in different families, they actually still have their own behaviours that they were born with, I suppose, from their parents. So it's a really interesting story about 2 birds that should be enemies ended up being in the same family. Okay kids, your first task this week, if you've got floorboards, is to try and do some really good skidding down your corridor. So as you can see, I've got some nice slippy socks here, perfect for skidding, and my daughter Abby's going to come too, and we're going to skid down the corridor. Now, biggest trick with skidding is to make sure you don't fall over and hit your head. So you've got to be extremely balanced and a little bit careful, even though you're also trying to slide. So if you make a bit of a run for it and then skid, it's the best. Abby and I are just going to skid around for a bit now. Warm-up activity is this. Ready? Start by just doing some gentle slides. It's called no friction aerobics. Okay, and once you've got that, then you do a bit of a run up and you skid. Yes. See? It's good. Okay kids, now for today's activity, you need to set yourself up a ramp. Now I just used the back of an old calendar that I had. It can be cardboard, you could use a chopping board, whatever you want for your ramp, doesn't matter. And you're going to set it up. So I've put a shoebox behind my ramp, like this, and then I've just rested it on here, like that. So there's my ramp. And we're going to roll things down the ramp onto different surfaces. So we'll have different things on the floor, and then I'm going to show you some videos of marbles rolling down here, and then we're going to see how far does the marble roll on the different surfaces. Okay, so to do this you're going to need a ramp, which I showed you before. I've got my science journal, a measuring tape, but you can just use a ruler and a ruler or a ribbon or something like that that you can stretch out and measure, and a marble or something that can roll. So I'm just going to write a heading that says friction. And I'm going to write down what I'm doing. I'll do that after this. And I'm going to write down the measurements about how far this marble rolls when it rolls down the ramp and down the corridor. I'll measure it and put it in here. So the first surface I'm going to roll the marble onto is just this wooden floor here. So it's going to roll down the ramp and just straight along the wood. So my first thing that I'm going to write down is the wooden floorboards. Wooden floorboards, okay. Now, before I begin rolling, there's one other thing I just want to mention to you. You should know, because of lots of years of doing science with me, that when you do a test, you want it to be a fair test. So if I used a big marble for my first roll and then I used a small marble for my second one, that would not be a fair test, and you should know that. So the same marble, the same rolling ball or whatever you use every time, okay? The second thing is, let's say I release the marble from halfway down the ramp the first time, and then the second time I release it from right up the top. That's also not a fair test because it doesn't have the same run up, does it, before it goes onto the surface. So on my ramp, I've actually drawn a little black circle. I don't know if you can see it, but anyway, it's up here. And every time I do this, I'm going to hold my marble on that black dot and release it from there. So I know it's the same every single time. And obviously you don't want to change the angle of the ramp. It needs to always be exactly the same angle. All right, I think we're good to go. So let's get started. All right, I'm going to hold my marble here. Okay, ready, set, go. Oops, it's gone all the way into the kitchen and it's hit a wall at the other end of the kitchen. I might need to shut that door, I think, for the next one. Okay, this time I'm setting up a towel, a bath mat actually, at the bottom. Okay. $80 centimeters. So I'm going to write down in my book that the surface is 80 centimeters before it goes onto the floorboards. And I'm already having a bit of a guess that because it's a rough surface, that my marble might slow down a little bit, but I don't know. So that's why we do this test. So I pop that over there, get my marble. Let's see what happens. Okay, I'm going to drop it from the same place as before. 3, 2, 1. Interesting. Now from the bottom of the ramp, it got 3.3 meters. All right. So with the bath mat, it went 3 meters and 30 centimeters. Okay, so I measured the length of the corridor. I decided to shut the door, and I'm only going to measure within here. So if it hits the door, we'll just say that it's the same as the other ones. So the whole corridor from the bottom of the ramp is 5 meters and 20 centimeters. And when I added the bath mat, the ball rolled only 3 meters and 30 centimeters. All right, now each time you add a new surface to your experiment, you need to make sure it's the same length as the first one. So our first one was a bath mat, and mine was 80 centimeters. So now everything I use needs to be 80 centimeters. it's a good idea to try some surfaces that are smooth, like something like Glad wrap or foil or paper, and some surfaces that are rough, like you might have sandpaper or bubble wrap, or lots of different clothes have different kinds of surfaces on them. Alright, so if your marble rolls really far, like the first time I did this and it went all the way out there, that means there's not much slowing it down. There's not a lot of friction between the marble and the smooth floor, which you kind of know. I mean, that's what skidding around on socks is, right? But then if you roll the marble over something that's a little bit more rough, for instance, like the bath mat, then there's more friction rubbing against that marble and it slows it down as it goes off the ramp. And that's why it didn't get quite as far. So you're going to try different surfaces today, and then at the end I want you to put them in order of which one of those surfaces has the most friction. So which one slowed down the marble the most and which one had the least friction with the marble, so the marble went the furthest. And I want you to put them in order of the most friction to the least friction. And I'm going to set up an assignment on Google Classroom for you to do that for me. Last week on Science Adventures in Legoland. 430 Whitehorse students radioed in to help Danielle and Sunny solve the mystery of why food goes off over time. These were some of the responses. Sunny and Danielle decided to go back and visit the man in the juice bar and ask him some questions about his fruit. "Excuse me, juice man, we've been wondering why all your fruit looks so fresh when the banana in my school bag looked really black and fluffy."
"Ah, well, all this fruit is very fresh. We have to buy it in every second day."
"But what happens if you don't buy it in every second day?"
"Well, we've had the same problem as you, that the fruit starts to change colour and smell a bit funny, and sometimes stuff starts growing on them."
"Does that happen to all fruit?"
"Oh yeah, mate, most fruit."
"Do you know what it is that grows on them?"
"Yeah, do mate. You may not realise that tiny little bacteria and fungi live all over fruits and vegetables. They are so small that you can't see them. These tiny creatures are extremely good at breaking things down. After a fruit or vegetable is picked, the bacteria and fungi start to grow, eating the food and making it break down."
"Is that what the fluffy stuff is?"
"Yeah, mate. The fluffy stuff is usually fungi, and the shiny slimy bits are usually bacteria."
"Is there any way to stop it?"
"Well, once the fruit is ripe and ready, you can put it in the fridge, which slows down the bacteria and fungi. But it won't stop them forever, mate. Eventually, all living things break down."
"That's very helpful, thank you. Do you know if other food breaks down too?"
"Well, you might need to go and ask the cafe lady next door about that. She has other types of food over there, mate."
Sunny and Danielle made their way back to the cafe again. Sunny was eyeing off sandwiches on the top counter, while Danielle asked the lady about other types of food.
"Hello again. Do you happen to know of any foods that don't go off or grow bacteria and fungi?"
"Well, we have lots of baking supplies here, and things like sugar and salt almost never go off. You can keep them for years in the cupboard and they are still good to use. Also, other things like jam and chutneys have lots of sugar in them, so they last a really long time. And then there are the dried out things like rice and dried peas and things which don't go off as easily because bacteria and fungi like to grow on more wet things. Maybe if I dry out my banana it will be okay?"
Sunny, I think that banana is well beyond being okay."
"Oh, what about my muffin?"
That too, Sunny."
And with that, the mystery was solved. Did you guess why food goes off over time? hopefully today you've kind of got an idea that we use friction in our life all the time. It's a force that's really important for gripping things, using things, holding things, walking on things, and for slowing things down. And we have it in our everyday life. Next week we're going to have a bit of an activity where we look at what would life be like if there was no friction. So I look forward to seeing you next time. I'll see you later. Bye.